the Organic Science Cluster program is led by the Organic Federation of Canada as the industry applicant, and we work together with the Federation to develop this program on behalf of the researchers and in collaboration with the researchers across the country. So the Organic Science Cluster program is, we're on our second cluster, and it is a national program that's funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through their Agri-Innovation program. And it's a 5-year research program that we pretty much set all of the research priorities and the projects at the beginning of the 5 years, and then it allows continuity for the projects to continue over that time frame. The total value of the Science Cluster 2 program is $10.5 million or thereabouts. There's a cost-sharing ratio that's involved, so about 75% of the funding comes from the federal government, and about 25% comes from industry. And so therefore, we're looking at industry contribution of over $2 million towards this science program. So all told, this is the Science Cluster makes up one of the largest federal government contributions to organic agriculture in the country. And so we want to make sure that we gratefully acknowledge that contribution. And the Science Cluster program is, if you go to our website that hosts the Science Cluster, it's dal.ca/OACC, and if you click on the Clusters tab, or Science Clusters tab, you'll see all the information about the Science Clusters and the latest results from all of the different projects. This cluster has 37 different research activities or different research projects happening right across the country. It involves university scientists as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada scientists. And many of the projects are happening right on farms. The projects are funded by industry partners that may range from individual farmers to large businesses or commodity groups. And all of that information is available on our website. We also just recently presented a magazine that provides, or produced a magazine that provides an overview, a brief snapshot of each of the research activities, and I believe that link was included when the announcement went out regarding these sessions. So with that, we have two sessions that will be held today and on, I think, April 11th, if I remember correctly. And today we have 3 presenters, and most of them are quite well known, or I think they're all very well known already in the prairies. And so I won't spend too much time with introductions. Rather, I'll allow more time for questions. Dr. Shirtliffe will be talking about managing weeds and organic pulse crops and integrated approach. You have 15 minutes, Steve.
Okay, Andy, I like how you say that kind of ominously. So I'm talking about integrated weed control and pulses. I believe you can download the link if you want. There's a title slide there. All I want to mention about this is just the excellent assistance we've had on this. We've had 2 top-notch graduate students. Catherine Stanley started off the inter-row tillage stuff a couple of years ago. She may even be on this call. We have Alexander Alba, who's been, truly a workhorse in just getting this work done well, and as well our research officer in our group, Lena Sorovi, who I think many of you are familiar with. She's starting to do a lot of extension out there as well. She's really taken up a position of leadership within our group as well. So anyways, we'll move on to the introduction. And I'm starting off here. I'm not going to explain the critical period of weed control, but that's what's at the top of this slide. But my point here is that, and I think all of you know this, is that most pulse crops are not very competitive at all. And I'm going to talk mostly about lentil in this presentation because that's what we've done the most of, although we've done a lot of work on pea as well. But they do have this, that without weed control, the effects of weeds can be disastrous. And in that photo there on the left, you can see wild oats and other weeds towering above the lentils, whereas the lentils are controlled there. And and because of that, we know that we have to keep, for example, in lentils, we have to keep them weed-free between the 5 to 10 node stage, and sometimes even longer if there's a sparse canopy to prevent yield loss. So going into that, I started research on organic pulses, I guess almost 10 years ago. Julia Baird was the first graduate student working on it. And to be honest, when I started working on it, I was scared witless because I'd done some work organically at that time in cereals, and I wasn't sure we were going to be able to grow pulses organically because I didn't think they're competitive enough. I thought it was just going to be a mess. But what we found is the first thing we looked at was just seeding rate in lentils, and you can see in the graph on the left, as we increased the seeding rate, and you see that one curve going up, as we increased it above the red vertical line, we increased the crop biomass, and having more crop there resulted in a decrease in weed biomass. That's also, if we go to the next slide, where you can see the red bar and arrow on the right-hand side, we can see that also increases our grain yield. And we did economic analysis on that, and we arrived at on a seeding rate for organic conditions that should be somewhere probably between 300 and 400 seeds per meter squared, quite a bit above the conventional rate of 130, which was recommended at that time. So under those conditions, we were able to produce lentils that look pretty good. And in fact, if we look at this next slide with the pictures on it, we can see that the lentils were, in the green picture there, we can see that there is some weeds in them, but they're not that bad. And at harvest, they don't look that bad. And in fact, we're able to do that. One of the reasons we're able to do that as well is we also, because we were growing these under organic conditions, we also employed mechanical weed control. In this case, we used I should mention that those results were all under organic conditions, and I think everything I'm presenting here has been done on either rented land that's organic or long-term land at the University of Saskatchewan that's been organically farmed quite a while now. So anyways, in this next picture, we can see a small weeding harrow going there, and we were able to do that. And there's some work here by Eric Johnson that just shows that that yes, harrowing can give you a yield increase because of weed control, but it is kind of finicky if you start to get too much crop burial. If you look on the x-axis there, as soon as you get up above about 60 or 70% burial in field P, your yield actually starts to go down because of the crop damage, and that's because harrows are somewhat hard on the crop as well. They're not that selective. They don't selectively kill the weeds that well. They do kill weeds, but they also hurt your crop, so that can be an issue. And here's just a picture of a large scale tine weeder. I believe this one's about either 70 or 80 feet. Sometimes in these presentations, producers will say, "Oh, these tiny implements won't work on my farm." So I like to show pictures of big farm equipment as well, just to let people know that, yes, you can buy big equipment to actually do lots of acres with it. Anyways, around that time, Eric started also looking at the Mintill rotary hoe, at a rotary hoe. And when I first saw these implements, this is on the next page with the title Mintill rotary hoe. When I first saw this, I didn't think that these implements would do anything because they're just kind of they look like a rotary harrow, but they have more of a sharper tine on the bottom. And these are used very early on. We'll get into them earlier. With Eric, if you look on the next slide, the lentil tolerance to rotary hoe, what he found, in fact, in all three pulses that he assessed was that the good thing about this implement is that the crops had much greater tolerance to them. In fact, he had trouble finding any tolerance issues at all with even multiple passes up to 5 passes. And I don't think I showed in this one, there was an advantage as well. The Mintill rotary hoe is able to go into a lot of crop residue. Maybe you can see it in those pictures that there's a lot of crop residue, whereas the tine weeders, well, they will clear some crop residue. If it's thick, crop residue clearance can be an issue. And here's a picture on the next page of a larger unit. They're available up to about 60 feet wide, so they are available for commercial farmers. The last method that we've looked at in terms of weed control is steerable inter-row cultivators. And here you can see kind of a field scale and a small scale version. And the field scale versions, they use camera mount. They use frame-mounted cameras, which are able to steer the cultivator so that it goes between the crop rows, and crop rows as narrow as 9 or 10 inches. Ours goes in 12 inches rows, and if we go look at the next page, we can see quite a wide one here. And this is actually a picture, I just tweeted it out yesterday, of a farmer in Saskatchewan who has a 60. I think it's a 60 foot or a 50. It's quite a, well, you can see how big it is. It's a big wide iron box steerable cultivator. There's a nice video of it online. And then he's using it on 10-inch rows. So Catherine Stanley did work on this, and we found that within the critical period of weed control for lentil, and that's on the next slide there with the graph on it, crop tolerance to field P to inter-row cultivation, that we looked at the tolerance of field P, and we found out that it did have good tolerance. We didn't really look much at weed control with it just because of the years we had. That left our next thing. So if we go to our next slide, and it's a bit of a busy slide, but it says, but what weeding machine is the best? And this research really arose out of, this may sound bad, but annoying questions, not annoying questions, but questions that farmers would give me at presentations. I'd talk about all these machines, and invariably I'd get at least one farmer asking during the presentation or several after, well, what machine is best? What machine works best? So we decided to put together an experiment to look at that. But the first thing you have to realize is that they each have their own kind of little weed control niche. At the top there, the rotary hoe, you can see the rotary hoe kind of cartoon there, as well as the picture, the little symbol of it with the wheels. That only controls weeds pre-emergence to early cotyledon stage. The harrows can control weeds later, and in fact, you have to go later for crop tolerance, because if you use them too early, you'll hurt your crop too much. And they can get weeds somewhat bigger, but when they get too big, the harrows can't uproot them because they're rooted too heavy and they're too big to cover with soil. Finally, the inter-row tillage, its niche is going between the rows, and because of that, your crop has to be big enough so that you can see the rows. So you can see that they have different timings as well. So we put together this experiment, and there's a busy table here. I won't belabor it too much on this page, but we had 2 seeding rates for field peel and lentil, and we had 2 seeding rates, which we had determined from Julia Baird's work. We had, in lentil, we used a seeding rate of 130 and 260. We could have probably even gone higher for the lentil, but just because of seed costs, we didn't go higher than that. We doubled it. And then field pea, we went from 90 to 135. And then we used all combinations of rotary hoe, flex, the tine cultivator, and the inter-row cultivation in a factorial arrangement. And basically to figure out which machine or which combination is the best in terms of weed control and in terms of crop yield. Here we can see the harrow going through. There's normally a video here, but we can't display it on the next slide. It has poor crop tolerance. The rotary hoe, you can see a picture of that. We'll just quickly click through these. And finally, we see the inter-row cultivator. If we look on the slide that has six images on it, you get an idea of the timing of it. And you can sort of see before the rotary hoe with the tiny weeds, and after. We talk about them being in the white thread stage. They have to be very small, preferably not even emerged yet. The harrow, they can be a bit bigger, and then the inter-row tillage, they're larger, but of course it doesn't control weeds in the row. And here's a visual weed control on the next slide. When we started doing this, we could see that we had a couple issues I wanted to point out. One, the middle one, you can see often our best looking treatment was our rotary hoe and our cultivator. That wasn't one of our better ones. When we went to a triple combination of all 3 tillage implements, we found that crop tolerance suffered, and we were hurting the crop too much in all cases. Just all those tillage operations were hurting it. But let's get to the data here on the next slide with the weed biomass. What we see on the left side, and this is in lentil, that going to the higher seeding rate on average decreased weed biomass by 16%, and by using mechanical weed control, we had up to a 76% decrease in weed biomass. So overall, rotary hoe tended to work one of the better ones, but all implements work quite well, and combinations tended to work better than single ones, especially combinations that involved an early treatment, like using a harrow or a rotary hoe, so we could get some early in-row weed control, and coming later with the inter-row tillage to get those larger weeds that may be growing between the rows. Those tended to work quite well, and we got what I thought was quite astounding levels of weed control with that. In terms of the number of treatments, 2 was kind of the optimum combination for having two different types of implements as we do that. And then and here's just visual weed control, which we've already seen on this page here, so I won't belabor that slide. And now we'll go to the yield slide, which has the 2 graphs on it. In terms of lentil yield, increasing our seeding rate increased our yield by 30%, and we had about our best treatments had about a 55% increase in seed yield, and we're getting fairly close to the hand-weeded control. So quite pleased with that, growing, on average about 1,300 pounds of lentils per acre under organic conditions, which can be a large money maker. In terms of yield, here you can again see that about two combinations of mechanical weed control did the best, and you can kind of see when we looked at it that way. So it's kind of a different presentation of the data. Going to field P, we also did field P, very, very similar results. But I guess the main thing is that if we look at weed biomass, is that your choice of implement didn't matter as much in field P. Yes, the rotary hoe still worked somewhat better. It wasn't significantly different from the other implements, but having a combination of treatments worked much better than just having inter-row tillage as well. So farmers out there that are buying inter-row tillage cultivators, that's not the total answer for weed control. You should still be trying to get out there early with some harrows or rotary hoe to get that, and then you'll get your full organic weed control from mechanical weed control thing. Our seeding rate didn't have a significant effect on weed biomass, surprisingly. Again, here on the next page, you see that having two different types of mechanical weed control gave us a much better reduction in weed biomass, although even one gave us some as well, so that was good. Finally, on our yield, we had there was no real significant differences in our yield in our field peas, but numerically, rotary hoe was often one of the better ones for increasing the yield, and that's not surprising. We know in weed science the importance of early weed removal, especially when densities are high. So having that early weed removal is important in field P. And there's our field P yield. We did have a response in yield to seeding rate, a 13% increase in the seeding rate. So somebody say something? Okay. And we'll skip that next slide because I'm getting close to the end. If we go to the conclusion slide, I guess the conclusions are all in-crop mechanical weed control methods reduced weed biomass. The most consistent treatment across all experiments and both crops was the rotary hoe followed by inter-row tillage. But I'll put a big but in there. The rotary hoe, you have to have perfect timing with it. You have to get out there. You probably have a window of at most 2 to 3 days of getting that proper timing for it. If it's pouring rain in that period, you may not be able to use it. So I think producers have to consider that you may have to use a harrow instead in some years if you can't get out there in rotary hoe or if the soil's not in the right condition. The seeding rate also reduced weed biomass in lentil and increased yield in both crops. What we're really excited about, it was that the best combinations increased seed yield by about 70% and reduced weed biomass by about 80%. This was in lentil. We're getting phenomenal rates, phenomenal weed control by combining these systems, and we couldn't be more pleased. And we can see the picture on the left there that's showing kind of our best treatment by our worst treatment. And this is one of those wonderful trials that you could always go through and visually, you didn't have to do stats on this trial to see which treatments were working. Anyways, that's it. Our acknowledgments, you can see it on the last slide. Of course, going forward to WGRF and the pulse growers were our big contributors for this research. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. Nice job and right on time, so it's very well done. So we'll open up the lines for some questions just for Steve, and then we'll open up more widely for all of the speakers. So questions relating to Steve's presentation.
Hi, Steve. It's Jed Franklin here. I'm wondering about the weeds that you were dealing with. Are these, wild oat thistle combinations, or are these broadleaf thistles?
Yeah, thistles. If I had more time, I think I had that on one slide or something where I said, none of these will do much on thistle. Thistles we're actually addressing that, and hopefully in the next cluster, because that's the big boogeyman as far as weed control. That's, I think, still remaining for organic weed control. I think you might be able, the inter-row tillage, you might be able to get a bit of suppression, but those thistles are going to come back and work really hard. And I'll be right honest here, we try to avoid land that had excessive thistles on it because none of these methods will work well on that, and the patchy nature of it would have obscured the differences. So we're assuming that you have your thistles under control, and the only way to really do that is through, that we know that works is tillage and growing competitive crops, and perhaps clipping has some effect in there. We're going to be addressing that, but you have to use tillage in an organic system, or else thistles can be bad, as you guys all know.
I agree. How about wild oats?
Wild oats, we didn't have a lot of wild oats in our trials, but we did have some. The rotary hoeing won't work well on wild oats. The harrowing can work well if they're emerging from the top layer. The inter-row cultivation will kill them in that zone between the rows. We had mostly wild mustard, green foxtail, lamb's quarters, etc. Alex is just analyzing he's finished analyzing the crop community stuff, but I just didn't have time to present it.
Other questions for Steve?
Will Odie here. Just as an additional note, in talking to Alex, I guess the other factor that exists, of course, for farmers is the cost of the equipment, and how that's balanced off. And he said that right now he's sort of doing a cost analysis on the equipment and how long it would actually take from these savings that has been demonstrated in your presentation here to actually pay for the equipment. And I think that's an excellent addition to that research.
We're looking. He's looking at that right now. We're having some trouble in actually sourcing prices of large field scale machinery, because I dare say that because it's still a niche product, that the sellers of it, the dealers of it, don't like to have full disclosure on what they sell for, because you can always extract more from some markets than others. This is not a new concept in organic agriculture. We've had it on the selling side of our products for a long time, but we're trying. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you have some good numbers on there, and I know we've contacted some farmers that have bought this machinery, and some of them are willing to share what they actually paid for it, because that's vital to be able to calculate that out. A lot of it's going to depend, unfortunately, on how big the farm is. I did some rough calculations on kind of going to a rotary hoe inter-row tillage combination, and you're getting weed control. If you're using it on 500 acre or maybe 1,000 acres a year, you're getting weed control of under $20 an acre, which is quite reasonable, I believe. But those are just kind of back of the napkin type of calculations.
Great, thanks, Steve. I have a question for you as well. And in terms of the implements that you're using, it looks like from a number of your photographs that the trials were on heavier textured soils. And does it make a difference with these different pieces of equipment, what kind of soil you're on?
Yeah, it makes a real difference. And there's a lot of issues that I didn't talk about too. Stones are a big issue, of course. If you're on stony land, the rotary hoe is not going to work very well. And harrows will work depending on how stony it is. The other issue is in lentils, of course, is that the inter-row tillage can heave up soil clods. So what we're recommending is that farmers roll their lentils after the final inter-row tillage has happened. And there's been some older research on that you can safely roll lentils without yield loss, 5 to 6 node stage, and even later there's a little bit of yield loss. So if you're having to choose between not being able to harvest dirt and that, you're probably, if you can go out and roll them on a hot day where they're wilting a little bit, hopefully you shouldn't do too much damage. But yeah, like the soil texture is everything. If you get really packed hard clay, the rotary hoe doesn't work that well. Similarly, all of them, the harrows like a bit of tilt in the soil too. If you end up with a packed kind of a roadway happening, that thing. The inter-row tillage seems to be somewhat agnostic. We've even used it under no-till conditions, and we've been able to go through quite well. So we haven't had an issue there unless it gets really, really mucky. But I don't know if Catherine Stanley's on the line, but her first year of her trial, they were going through some unbelievably mucky plots to apply the treatments, and we're able to do it fairly successfully.
John Finney here. I just have a question regarding the fertility situation on your lentil plots, specifically phosphorus. Did you do any checking to see what the phosphorus levels were before you started?
We do soil test those. I have those numbers. I don't have them memorized. Our phosphorus levels are getting quite on the low side. So that is, that's not within the scope of this. We didn't do it. In Catherine's work, we attempted to look at some of the mineralization effects of the inter-row tillage, but it was so wet, and the initial results weren't promising. It was hard to see any differences, so we just didn't. Just because it wasn't working out, and she had too high of a workload, we didn't do that part on it. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it did.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we have about 10 to 15 minutes that we can offer for general comments, discussion, or questions. And if Jennifer and Miriam, are you still both on the line?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So we'll open it up to questions or discussion on all three present.
Will Odie here. Going back to the discussion about oats versus wheat breeding under an organic regime, I think, there certainly was an advantage in the oat scenario to have grain millers as a corporate entity pushed behind this and obviously registering the crop or licensing it. And of course, the thing is that the problem that exists at the milling end is whether a crop produces better or has better yield. It doesn't really affect the millers at all. As long as they're getting the product they want. So really it's up to the farmers to push forward and make their voices known that, in fact, they want organic regime breeding trials for wheat as well. And I think that, as I mentioned, that research that came out of the University of Manitoba, 10% is a pretty striking difference. What was interesting, I think, if my reading of that research was correct, was that actually the yields on the organically researched crops were actually better under conventional regimes after the crop got to that point, as well as under organic.
That's true. AAC tradition does yield very well across environments. And that was the cultivar that was developed organically.
It's Martin Entz here. I just wanted to, support what Will said. We actually published that work was Ann Kirk's master's, and it was published in 2012. And it showed significant. It showed that 10% yield increase and higher protein and larger, plumper kernels. So that breeding under organic really did make a difference, and that was a very good study. It was the same population selected under both systems. But in terms of the other partner that we need is a willing plant breeder. And it just so happened that when that work was finished, the Ag Canada plant breeder left for another job, and so we lost that breeding leader. And I just want to, shout out to the Ag Canada colleagues who we've heard from today, that, their dedication to doing something in organic has been really critical, because when you get somebody who's a wheat breeder in Western Canada, applying for funds from industry for organic wheat breeding, they're not going to have trouble getting the funds. We just really need that leadership. And so we've been working with the wheat breeders in Ag Canada, but we're hoping that we have an enthusiastic one come forward. So those are my thoughts.
Very well put, Martin. It's exactly the issue that we have right now. And we need the farmers to be approaching and talking with the wheat breeders and bringing them into the fold. So by the time we get to our next Science Cluster program in 5 years, that they are primed and ready to go. Further questions for the speakers?
Yeah, Scott Beaton calling from West Winnipeg. I just had a quick one for Dr. Mitchell-Fetch. The availability of those oat cultivars that you've been working on, how does it look for the next few years?
I believe AAC or Avena will be, there will be some seed available this spring. OT 8006 or AAC Consor will just start into the pedigreed system this spring, so it will be 2 or 3 years before there's any certified seed available.
Okay, and it's available through whom, or did Stuart buy it all up for this year?
Stuart didn't get it all. It's Scott here with Grain Millers. I was just going to make the comment that we tasked Fedoric Seeds at CAMSAC with doing the multiplication and basically handling the seed sales for us. We're not an input company or don't want to pretend to be one, so we hired some real good professionals to do that. I'll give you their number for any of the producers that are on that want to inquire further about it. They're 306-542-4235. I believe there still is seed available. I'm not sure on the amount or cost or anything like that, but Mike or Rod at Fedoric Seeds can help you with that.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Will Hody speaking. I did make an inquiry back in February, and they weren't quite organized at that point. They didn't have any clean, but the price was going to be, I think, around $11.50 a bushel from Fedoric's.
Oh, and I guess one other note on the seed thing. So with buying the seed, you are not required, even though we have the license on it, you aren't required to sell it, your grain back to grain millers. It is an open variety for you to grow and market how you please. But we would love you to sell it back to us, of course.
Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, I think there's a real vote of thanks should be given to grain millers for pushing this forward. It's it may be the first of many varieties over the years, but it's a great start. So thank you to grain millers.
And I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the industry partners that were contributing to these particular research projects. So as Grain Millers and Cliff Bar and Prairie Oat Growers Association, and then Western Grains Research Foundation on Miriam's project, and then on Steve's we had Sask Pulse, as well as Western Grains Research Foundation. So it's really important that we stay connected, especially to these. It's really nice to see the commodity groups contributing to organic research as well. And so I think if we can get more organic growers sitting on boards of some of these commodity groups and showing that there's a real market and some integrity in the organic side, that builds further industry support also. So thank you very much. Any other questions before we close down? I do have one for Jennifer that's I've always kind of been it's been wondering, I guess, is to what extent, like genomics is not genetic engineering. Genomics is looking at the genome of the oats in this case and mapping it and understanding what genes are turned on or off or suppressed and so on. And do you use genomics when you're doing your breeding program for oats?
I do use the genomics, or at least a subsection of it called molecular marker assisted breeding in the conventional program, and we've just started using it more regularly in the last couple of years because we've finally gotten some markers available or identified that are really useful in my program, and I'm starting to get very excited about the possibilities of where we can go with using marker-assisted breeding and marker-assisted back crossing, which is another tactic that we use. And I'm hoping with the next Growing Forward or Organic Science Cluster number 3 that we will be able to incorporate molecular markers into the organic program as well. And I think there's a lot of things that we can't identify just by looking at the lines in the field, but perhaps with molecular markers we can identify those traits and make sure we keep them in the program and have them in the finished cultivars. So I'm getting excited about this part of the program.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm excited to hear that. I do get questions whenever I get into breeding discussions with anyone from locally or around the world. They do come back and ask if marker-assisted breeding is being used in Canada for organic breeding programs. So very good. Any other last questions?